Well, Australian banks and gambling companies especially have felt the sharp financial sting of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing agency AUSTRAC, which has levied billions of dollars worth of fines and penalties against them. But there's another issue, and that is sanctions, as Australia has applied to many countries and individuals, including Russia, North Korea and Iran. Famously, back in the late 1990s and for the next 10 years, the wheat trader AWB was discovered to have broken sanctions by allowing payments to the regime of the then Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein in an oil for wheat scandal. Now, with so many sanctions today, the risk is high for banks and others to inadvertently make illicit payments. So the Commonwealth Bank today joined a fundraising campaign for a new British-based company, Global Screening Services. Its chief executive is Tom Scampion, who joins me now. Tom, many thanks for your time. Is this a piece of insurance by the Commonwealth Bank to just make certain it's got systems in place to show that payments are not potentially breaking these sanctions?
Well, sanctions controls are insurance, so whether or not they're any different to the other 40 banks we're working with, I'll leave it to them to call. But for us, this is an industry problem that deserves an industry solution. It's great to have CBA as part of our investors.
OK, so then I spoke about AUSTRAC there, but principally the regulator here is the Australian Sanctions Office.
That's right.
So therefore, what are the penalties like if banks or gambling companies or others who have payments here inadvertently or deliberately break those sanctions?
So it's law. So, DFAT and the ASO that are part of DFAT, they designate individuals and entities, as does the United States, the authorities in Europe, the United Nations and so on. And so you have to comply with law. It depends how egregious the failings are as to what fine may be levied. But fundamentally, I think every bank wants to comply with the law. So first and foremost, complying with the law is what's driving all this activity.
But the one thing, going back to that situation in the early 2000s and beyond, the AWB, the Old Australian Wheat Board, its reputation was shredded as a result of those allegations that it went around the sanctions to actually get those payments out of Iran, out of Iraq rather. That is the fundamental issue for many of these companies. It is the fact that they will look bad if they allow these payments to take place.
Well, absolutely. And remember, this is foreign policy. This is the thing you do just before you go to war. So sanctions have been around for a long time, and it's how do you put financial pressure on people to change their activities. And restricting access to the financial systems is the fundamental here. So reputationally, I think it's pretty clear what side of the line you want to be on.
That's right. So, but then the other problem is the complexity, because every country will have different sanctions on different regimes and different individuals potentially. Is that what your company tries to track and monitor?
Absolutely. And what we do is we do it from the ground up. So we work with global experts from all of the banks that design what constitutes best practice, and then we make it available to everyone. You could be the biggest, the smallest bank in the world, it matters not. What we do is we say, look, what does good practice look like? And let's help you on that journey. Just to give you a number, if I may, it's comfortably 20 billion transactions cross-border, so payments cross-border globally. If you add all sorts of other transactions, it's easily 40 billion. If you're stopping 10% of that activity, and that's a pretty conservative number, that's a huge amount of friction, unnecessary friction. So let's pull resources and do it right first time.
Well, I think we can actually show here some of the countries with which Australia has sanctions. And there's two forms of sanctions I should actually explain to people as well. One of those forms of sanctions is basically brought in by the United Nations Security Council. So you can see here the various organisations and countries that via the UN we have sanctions against. But then we move forward because there's other sanctions as well, because these particular sanctions are autonomous. So these are sanctions that Australia has chosen itself. Now, you're right to say that many of those countries would be keen to use whatever payment system they can to get foreign currency into their own countries, wouldn't they?
Well, that's right. And also, what constitutes a match? I mean, it's quite basic. It's, does Tom match to Thomas? And are we all doing the same form of matching? So I can put a name on a list, and then I ask every one of the 100 banks in Australia to work it out for themselves. That makes no sense. So why don't we agree standards and do it consistently?
And so that means that not only are you getting best practice out of what happens here in Australia and the Australian banks and the Commonwealth Bank, but you can also cross-reference that with all of the other 40 banks that you're dealing with around the world.
And we can save time. I mean, people whose name sounds a bit like a bad actor on one of these lists, their payments are held up unnecessarily. So therefore, stopping that sort of friction has got to be a good thing.
It's got to be a good thing. There's no doubt about that. Well, the Commonwealth Bank has signed up. Maybe some others will as well. Tom Scampion, many thanks for your time today.